I used to think I knew what the Silk Road was. Trade routes, ancient cities, history pressed flat in a textbook. But when I first got there, what actually fascinated me was how much of it was still alive. The same mountains, the same people, the same way of making things, by hand, the way their grandmothers did it. And then you walk into Almaty or Tashkent and you see something completely different. Young nations building themselves from scratch, creating something brand new while the old world is still breathing right beside them. That's the journey we're taking, not back in time, into a place where three different moments exist at once. We'll start in Almaty, a city that's reclaiming itself. The Ascension Cathedral, the tallest wooden structure in the world, built entirely without nails so it can move with the earthquakes. It still stands in the morning light. The Soviet-era mosaics and sculptures that line the streets aren't relics. They're part of how Kazakhs are deciding what their city looks like now. We'll wander through the Green Bazaar, where the air is thick with saffron and cumin and dried apricots so ripe you can practically taste the mountains. We'll taste kazi, the traditional horse sausage, and maybe, if you're brave, kumiz, fermented mare's milk that sustained the steppe for centuries. It's not comfortable. It's not meant to be. It's continuity. From there, we'll travel east by van for a few hours over roads that aren't always smooth, toward Charyn Canyon. And as we move, the landscape begins to reveal itself. The Charyn River carved this place over 12 million years. The rock formations look like ancient castles and cathedrals, but they're really just stone shaped by time and water. We'll walk through the Valley of Castles, where the red sandstone ignites in gold and amber. You'll smell artemisia, the wormwood that is the scent of the Kazakh steppe itself. From Charyn, we'll continue east toward the Kolsai Lakes region and into Kyrgyzstan. We'll stay a couple of nights in Karakol in a family-run guest house on the edge of the city. And from there, we'll head out to the Jeti Oguz Gorge, a lush valley where massive red sandstone formations rise out of the green, the Seven Bulls, from which the valley takes its name. We'll visit a women's cooperative that has revived the traditional art of needle felting, a craft that nearly disappeared during Soviet times and is now passed back from mother to daughter the way it always was. The next day, we'll drive west along the south shore of Issyk-Kul. The lake is impossibly blue, and across the water, the mountains on the north shore look like they rise straight up from the surface. The road isn't a highway. It's how people who live here actually travel. The slowness is the point. It's how you notice things. Kyrgyzstan remained nomadic until the 19th century. That matters. It means the culture that shaped this place wasn't built on hierarchy. Nomadic life required women to herd, to defend, and to manage. So Kyrgyzstan skipped the gender subordination that defined the rest of the region. You'll feel that difference the moment you arrive. We'll stop at Kızıltuğ, a village where Kyrgyz families still make shirdak, those traditional carpets with bold, striking geometric designs. You'll watch them work. The patterns haven't changed in centuries, but they're not museum pieces. They're functional, beautiful, still being made because people still want them. We'll visit a yurt master's workshop and see how these structures are built from scratch. A collapsible wooden frame, felt covering, everything braided together. It's not a performance, it's just how people live. We'll drive through Chonkamin, a valley on the northwest edge of Issyk-Kul. Here we'll stay in a family-run guest house nestled in the mountains where the landscape feels so close you feel small. We'll hear Kyrgyz folk music, the komuz, a three-stringed instrument that can mimic a horse galloping, and the kul kayak, a bowed fiddle that sounds so close to the human voice it raises the hair on your arms. This music tells a story without needing words. And at night, out here, away from any city, we'll sit under a Tian Shan sky where the stars feel close enough to touch. Then we'll drive to Bishkek, the capital. It's a city trying to figure out what comes next. Wide boulevards, new construction beside old Soviet blocks. It's not polished, it's real. And after a stretch of guest houses, we'll check into a proper city hotel, because authentic doesn't mean uncomfortable, and a little bit of luxury and creature comforts are part of how we travel too. From Bishkek, we fly to Tashkent. We spend a few days here because Tashkent matters. It's Uzbekistan deciding what a modern Central Asian city looks like. We'll ride the metro. It's less a transit system than an underground gallery. Every station is different. The Kosmonavtlar station has blue tiles honoring the cosmonauts. The Alisher-Navoy station has vaulted ceilings and gilded details. It's a philosophy. Art belongs to everyone, displayed in public spaces where ordinary people pass through every day. We'll go to the Plov Center at Beshkozon, where thousands of portions of traditional plov are cooked in enormous cast-iron kazans, the size of satellite dishes. You'll smell the wood smoke and cumin from a block away. You'll eat it on communal platters, fragrant rice layered with tender lamb, yellow carrots, chickpeas, and maybe a quail egg on top. It's messy and delicious, and exactly the same as it's been for centuries. Then we'll board the Afrosyob, a sleek high-speed train that connects these ancient cities with a technology that didn't exist even a decade ago. As we glide through the desert towards Samarkand, you'll realize something. This train is Uzbekistan's answer to the same problem the Silk Road solved. How do you move people and goods across this vastness? The method changed, the need didn't. The old caravans took months, this takes hours. But the route is the same, the cities at the end are the same. Now we're in Samarkand. This was the center of the universe for 13 dynasties. Registan Square, translated as a sandy place in Persian, holds 3 madrasas covered in polychrome ceramic tiles, 10 pointed stars that symbolize the sky. The astronomical knowledge of the Timurid Empire glazed into every surface. We'll visit a workshop where Samarkand silk carpets are still made by hand, knot by knot, the way they have been for 1,000 years. These carpets are considered among the finest in the world, not because of marketing, but because of the silk itself, the natural dyes and the density of the knots. A single carpet can take years to complete. You'll watch the weavers at their looms and understand why these were the goods that traveled the Silk Road, prized from China to Venice. We'll share a communal lunch of Samarkand non. Sounds like Indian naan, but it's actually different. It's a flatbread that stays edible for days, and according to local lore, can only be made with the specific air of this city. From Samarkand, the high-speed train carries us to Bukhara. It's a different kind of place, medieval but lived in. People actually work and shop beneath the centuries-old trade domes. The wind rotates through the small openings in the domes as natural air conditioning, a solution so elegant it's been working for 1,000 years. We'll visit the Ark, the great citadel at the heart of the city, a fortress that has stood here in some form for over 1,500 years. Emirs lived here, armies were garrisoned here, prisoners were held here. Walking its ramparts, you can feel while Bukhara was once one of the most important cities in the Islamic world, a place of scholars, traders, and power. And just outside its walls, ordinary life is still going on, exactly as it always has. We'll sit at the Liabi House, an artificial reservoir surrounded by mulberry trees, and we'll watch the city introduce itself while we drink jasmine tea. Then, by regular rail, slower, older, and more intimate, we travel through the desert toward Khiva. Khiva is the final turn. Entering the Ichan Kala, the ancient inner city, feels like stepping into a story that actually happened. Mud brick walls, blue-tiled facades, quiet courtyards where time moves differently. The Juma Mosque, plain on the outside, but inside, a forest of 218 carved wooden columns, some dating back to the 10th century, each one different. Each one a craft person's answer to the question, how do I make something that lasts? Climb to the top of the watchtower in the Kunya Arc. You'll see the golden ramparts and turquoise domes stretching toward the desert horizon. The city was designed to protect its people from the steppe, to hold them safe, and it still does. Over these weeks, you'll move through landscapes that haven't changed, mountains, deserts, steppes, alongside people who have survived empires. Soviet colonization, independence, and modernization. The yurt makers are still making yurts, the carpet weavers are still weaving carpets. The bakers are still pulling bread from clay ovens, and at the same time, new trains are crossing the desert, new cities are being built, and the young people are deciding what comes next. That's what we're here to witness. Not nostalgia, not the way things were, the actual continuity, the resilience of a culture that knows how to endure, adapting as it always has. With a small group of like-minded Canadians, unhurried, present, that's the wheel and anchor difference. We're not just tourists passing through, we're witnesses to something real.